from the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Good morning. I'm Emilye Crosby, and we're here at the University of Southern Mississippi with Dean Eddie Holloway on December 2nd, 2015 as part of the Civil Rights History Project, which is co-sponsored by the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And with me are John Bishop and Guha Shankar. And well, good morning. And
good morning.
Thank you so much for doing the interview with us today. Could you start by telling us when and where you were born?
Eddie Holloway, born 1952, September 26th, Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Can you tell me about your family and growing up?
Yes, my mother and father, Beatrice Holloway. Actually, she was a Jemison before she moved from York, Alabama, and my father, Willie Holloway, was native to Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
What kind of work did your parents do?
My mother was a beautician, and I guess when her joy of fishing became as prominent, you could say she was a local fisherman. But my dad was a service provider and worked at the Meridian Fertilizer company, which was a precursor to Coastal Chemicals. They made various and sundry fertilizers, and I think the home office was Yazoo City, Mississippi. And his claim to fame, and my bragging point, is that he worked there for in excess of 60 years.
Oh my, that's a long working life in one place.
Yes, he told me when he went there they paid $1 a day and bet you couldn't make $1 a day.
So was it did they pay for piecework or?
Well, he indicated that his task primarily was delivering fertilizer by the barrel from one location to the other. And the work was so extreme, again, the pay was $1 a day, but they would bet you another $1 that you couldn't make a day.
So you couldn't actually last the whole day?
Yes, so that was a $2 a day work. And through the course of time, he became the office custodian. And even after the days of his retirement, the insurance of the company required that personnel be present at all times. So he stayed on the location as a watchman, if you will, just prior to his final illness.
Mm-hmm. So he worked almost his entire life?
His entire life,
yeah.
Yes.
Did he like working for that company?
I think he loved maybe not the work, but the people. I've until yet to find anybody that will make a statement ill of his being, his day-to-day walk. Many tell me that he would not sign a contract. He said, "That's my word." And I occasionally see people that still recall him for those attributes.
So he was somebody people trusted?
Until now, he's the best person that I ever remember meeting.
Your father?
Yes.
That's a wonderful feeling, I imagine. And where did your family live on Mobius Street?
904 Mobius Street.
And where was your mom's shop? Was it at the
My
house?
mom's shop was attached to the house. B's Beauty Salon.
Can you describe Mobile Street for us?
Mobile Street was a self-contained street as I remember it. Unless there were extreme needs, most of your needs were met inside of that Mobile Street area. There was a movie theater. There were probably 12 to 15 restaurants of some kind or the other, or taverns, or clubs, or nightclubs, or restaurants. As many beauty salons or barber shops. There was a physician's office, a dentist's office, a pharmacist, a couple of haberdasheries, tailor shops, at least six cleaners, 4 churches, a television repair shop, a watchmaker, at least 4 motels, if you will, or hotels, if you will, a couple of dance halls. And I would say the professionals of Hattiesburg lived in that area.
And was that really the heart of the black community?
That was the black community.
Right there in that circle.
Correct.
Around that. Were the residences and the businesses, were they sort of interspersed, or was there a sort of a stretch that was just businesses and then residents?
Yeah, that was probably a 4 to 5, maybe more, stretch of businesses. And for the most part, the businesses were not commingled with residential living unless there would be a residential structure on the same lot behind or beside a business.
Mm-hmm. What was it like for you as a young person to grow up in that atmosphere?
I remember happiness.
Yeah.
It appeared from a child's eye to live across the street from a school principal, or to live next door to a teacher, or to live across the street from executive types, if you will, that staffed in the insurance office on Mobius Street, or to go to church with the same people that lives in the catchment area of your house. There were always plenty of motivation, intrinsic as well as external, if you aspired to be.
Mm-hmm. Did you frequent the businesses? I mean, would you be in that part of the community? Go to the movie theater? Or?
I would go to the drugstore. I would go to the cleaners. From the time of my mother's birth, every Saturday I would go to Williams Cleaners to sit with Miss Thelma Williams, because she cleaned my clothes from the point of my mom's death. So although I was not required to go up there, I felt an obligation to go to sit with her because she would be there dispensing clothes by herself. And
so you keep her company?
Yes.
Was it busy? I mean, was it a vibrant area?
Yeah, Mobius Street was so busy. There were points when you would have to exit the sidewalk to get into the street to traverse, because it was a catchment area for a 30-mile radius. All of the people in the McLean, McLaurin, Beaumont, Richton areas, Wiggins, they would come to the Mobius Street area for beauty purposes, for clothing, for groceries, every Saturday.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was there did Camp Shelby, was there business from Camp Shelby in the community too, or?
Yes. Now, but the time that I'm speaking of, Camp Shelby was not an active Army training facility as opposed to the service for Mississippi trained personnel.
Okay, so was it just a training facility during World War II, and then?
It was a training facility for World Wars I and II, but it primarily went for summer training camps and other trainings. It's always been an active training facility, but with less activity on the national front.
Okay, so is that like National Guard?
National
training,
Guard,
that kind of thing?
National
Okay.
Guard preparations.
Okay.
Of course, at certain points, National Guard personnel would come from various and sundry other states. But in terms of what I understood it to be at a point when there were 100,000 military personnel at Camp Shelby that would come into the city, that hasn't existed for quite a while.
Okay. I know that I've heard that during World War II it just really boosted the economy.
True.
What were you? Where did you go to school? What were your schools like?
Well, initially I would have to say my kindergarten, the Maddie Robertson kindergarten, which was 2.5 blocks from my house on New Orleans Street. And following that, enrolled in W.H. Jones Elementary Junior High School, which opened in 1958, was my first grade year. I stayed there through 9 years, and then went to Rowan High School, located on Royal Street, but later changed to Martin Luther King Avenue.
So you mentioned that W.H. Jones Elementary and Junior High opened in 1958, so I'm assuming it's one of the schools that was built after the Brown decision.
Correct.
Were you aware of that at the time, sort of where that, what the impetus to sort of, that once the court ruled on integration, Mississippi tried to make separate but equal more real?
Okay. No, I was not at that time,
Mm-hmm.
in 1958. But shortly after, somewhere prior to 64, 65, I remember hearing some of the educators discussing that. As I told you, my mom died, and Mrs. Sipp, who was president of Mississippi Teachers Association, lived across the street. There was an MTA and an MEA. One catered to the African American teachers and the other to Caucasian teachers, but in and out of those houses, and I would say I was not the most athletic type that would always be playing in the street. I would be in with one of them somewhere in an encyclopedia, and obviously not welcome to listen to their conversations, but finding myself intrigued by some of the things that they were saying. So as a result of those things, I did learn of the state's effort to stymie full wholesale integration or desegregation by the building of schools such as W.H. Jones and Lillie Burney, and that was a wave that continued throughout the state of Mississippi.
You mentioned the two separate organizations for teachers. For people that don't know, can you say which one was which?
I think the Mississippi Teachers Association was primarily African Americans. I remember being out of school, and I remember that 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, was set aside for black teachers, and Thursday, Friday was set aside for white teachers.
Where did they, so when you say set aside, did they have a meeting?
A meeting place in Jackson.
Oh, okay, and so the white, which did you say, so white teachers would meet first and then?
Well, I can't say which one,
was which,
but they did
on
not meet
separate
together,
days,
right.
Yeah. What was, well, you mentioned earlier that your mother passed away. How old were you when she passed away?
11.
And at that point, you started spending more time with some of the teachers in the neighborhood?
I was always involved or connected by virtue of her being a beautician, and most of them would come around. And as I've told you, the majority of my teachers were members of my church. So even prior to her death, I would go to church with them because they lived next door, or I would go to teachers' meeting because they lived next door, or I would be there with one of their friends, or one of their children, and would go along with them. So church was almost an extension of the school.
Can you describe that a little bit for people? Sort of how the sort of interconnection between church and school?
Well, Mrs. Moore was my choir director, if you will. Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Wilson, was my choir director. Mrs. Moore, Mrs. Dice, was my third grade teacher, and she was my Sunday school teacher. And I would go to church with her every time she went. Mrs. Knight, my fifth grade teacher, was my Sunday school teacher, and they were all superintendents of Sunday school or educational services in our church. Miss Murtis Rue, who worked in conjunction with my second grade teacher, was a Sunday school teacher at Mount Carmel Baptist Church. So throughout the course of my earlier years' involvement, they were the same faces at different places.
Mm-hmm.
So in Sunday school or in church, they would know whether I was doing well in elementary school and vice versa. And we were anchored in the community, living next door, 3 doors down, across the street from. So the educational voids that may have existed in my house were filled by virtue of my wanting to meet the expectations of those that were taking me with them everywhere.
So I guess I sort of want to go in a couple directions. So it sounds like that from a very young age you were hungered for education. Is that a true assessment?
Yes, I don't know whether I hungered for education as opposed to I really wanted to be informed.
Okay.
I really wanted to know. And I knew that there were things of importance that I did not know. And I would see the way that the teachers and the principals would dress. I would observe their cars and see their walk and their gait and the spunk of which they would get about.
Yeah.
And I know I remember wanting some of that.
Yeah.
So it appeared that the pathway to getting that was to in part be like them.
Sounds like you were very much you looked up to them.
Correct.
Yeah. You said whatever educational void there might be in your home. How far did your parents, were they able to go to school?
I don't know, because my dad told me that he did not go to Eureka School. He said he went to the Little Red building. And from all I can gather, the Little Red building was really a little yellow house. Now, it may have been red at a point for him, and I've tried desperately to find out about that Little Red house.
Yeah.
With the history of Eureka High School, I do find that there was a Little Red house.
Interesting.
But I'm sure at that time, 6th grade or
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
My mom, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember one of the struggles that I had was every day when I'd get out of school, my dad would have a cardboard table on the porch waiting for me to get my lesson before I could go out of the yard. And we really struggled. He referred to a 0 as an ought. And that griped me to no end, to the point of me absolutely saying, despite his ability to count, that he was archaic, or that was old-fashioned, or that wasn't current, or I don't need you teaching me. So that was an everyday challenge for me. So I think from that assumption and from his writing that I gathered that he was not formally educated.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly not like Miss Sipp
Mm-hmm.
or Miss Cole or the Wilsons. He didn't go, and that he wore overalls to his work every day. That didn't remove my love for him, and it still today doesn't distract from me saying he was the best person that I know until this day.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew he was not formally schooled.
Mm-hmm. Are there things that you learned from him, lessons that you
Oh
can point
goodness,
to?
my daughter today at 31, 32 has asked me to write things down that he's said. I've had a life of challenge, and I don't say that with regret, and I don't say that certainly for any pity or concern. But I cannot recall a life's challenge that in a moment of silence, of being sequestered from other person, places, or things, that I can't recall something my dad told me that'll help me out of that. So I think he was extremely wise. I think I'll remember, this had nothing to do with it, but I remember getting my first car and a guy came by riding on a bicycle with a big boom box, and he said, "Eddie, I hear you got your car." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What kind did you get?" I said, "A Monte Carlo." He says, "Man, that's a Chevrolet." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why you didn't get a GTO?" I said, "I don't know anything about a GTO." He said, I said, "Well, what's wrong with the Chevrolet?" He said, "Man, that's a poor man's car." So I went on the porch and I said, "Daddy, is a Chevrolet made for a poor man?" He said, "Well, first, son, why are you asking me this?" I said, "Well, a guy just told me that a Chevrolet was a poor man's car, and a Pontiac was for a rich man." He said, "Was it the guy that just stopped by here?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm ashamed of you, baby." I said, "Why?" He said, "Son, he's on a bicycle." So he taught in silence, very kind, never a gruff word. I don't think I've ever heard him say damn or hell, but I can recall his wisdom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It must have had a big impact on your family to lose your mother.
Yes,
You said you were an only child.
only
as
child.
well. Do you have any memories of those days about how you and your father coped with that?
Well, it was an abrupt set of circumstances. My aunt came the same day from Alabama, and her daughter and husband, and she remained with me until the last day of school, and they took me to Alabama. That has to be the beginning of my civil rights history.
Okay.
They were wise, but totally uneducated, formally. But they lived and breathed civil rights, voting, watching the news every day. Oh, did they love Martin Luther King and all of the civil rights workers. And they were consumed with getting an education, becoming educationally astute, and to fight poverty. They instilled in me a heaping dose of pride. Pride in person, pride in appearance, pride in esprit de corps. Never borrow, never request, never beg. Put your best foot forward every day. And that was so overwhelming to me. They would take me to the lower echelon areas of the city of Birmingham and take me to the steel mills on payday and to see the people coming from the loan companies to be paid prior to the people getting their checks. They would show me the mothers with kids on their hips waiting for the men to be paid. And I remember, I was talking about it just yesterday, they said, "Ed, in our life and in our death, don't embarrass us like that. We'll be gone. We never had children, but you uphold our standards. You save, every month. You go to church every Sunday. You work every day. You don't beg for nothing. Earn your respect. That has come with a penalty, because all that I've traversed and been with didn't understand that. So it never has been that I've been so egotistical that I saw myself better than others. But I guess I have tried to live up to Inez and Lewis's and Aunt Punch's. Eat it that your mother is gone. We won't be here long. You might have to depend on yourself.
So were they, so they lived in Birmingham then?
They lived in Bessemer,
Bessemer? Okay.
which is 12 miles from Birmingham.
And this must have been
64, 65. Every holiday, every weekend, or every period of time when there was school was out, I'd take that train the next morning at 8 o'clock and go there. Bicycle, baseball glove. And during the earlier years, they would send my books, because the principal lived diagonally across the street, so he would know my classes that I needed. And they would box those books and send them to me in Alabama.
And how long did you stay with your relatives in Alabama?
Every summer.
Every summer?
Yeah, all but times when I would get a job of sort, or I could, I disliked it. They were so strict.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes 2, 3, 4 baths a day. And even to the point of ironing your handkerchiefs and your underwear. They were meticulous.
Yeah.
They ironed their paper bags for Lewis to take his lunch to the steel mills. So they said that if you would show a wrinkled bag, it would indicate that that bag had been used before. So yes, their concerns were to an extreme, but I never lost focus of what their intentions were. I know I grew weary of them. And
as a young boy.
As a young boy.
Young teenager.
But I know that I would always need to go see them. I know that I would always need to call them. While in school here, they would send me clothes, some of which I would want to wear, others I'd want to get rid of.
Were you allowed to do that, or did you have to wear them?
Oh, I could not, because they may would come down and want to see them. So I just didn't wear I didn't wear the red socks or the pink socks or the yellow socks. But I knew on a given day I would get a letter or a package
So they were just
or a phone call of love.
So you really knew you could count on them.
I knew that I had everlasting friends and relatives, and they would make sure I knew that.
Yeah.
That the others around me didn't care like they cared.
Yeah. You just mentioned that your aunt and uncle would send you these packages with the
Oh yeah.
bright colors and stuff.
Yeah, in some magazine, I don't know, with J.C. Penney's or Sears, they would see combinations: a yellow shirt, yellow socks, red shirt, red socks. Oh, and that's what they would send me in the mail, and I tried it, but as I told you, I won't wear red socks anymore.
What happened when you wore them?
Oh, they asked me, did I step on a nail, that my ankles were bleeding.
And that was it?
That was it.
You find a friend to share those red socks with.
Yeah.
You said that they really introduced you to civil rights, or
Yes.
was very fiery about it. Did in '64? So if you're in Birmingham or Bessemer, right next to Birmingham in '64, that would have been right after the big demonstration.
Correct.
Did they participate in that?
No, they did not march. They would be ones that would have given as much money as they could, would have gone to the church meetings, would have participated by virtue of their social clubs that they were belonged to, those clubs would make donations to funds that would be used to bond people out of jail. I can remember their interest consuming them inside of the walls of their home, but they weren't ones that would be rallying in the street. They would have been at that time 60 plus years of age. And I was telling my family the other day, goodness, they were 65 when they took a little old kid in at 11. You know, so how gracious, how gracious.
And that sort of explains at least some of their expectations for you, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Did they ever, I don't exactly know how much was going on in Birmingham at that particular time, but did they ever take you to mass meetings?
No, they took me to the 16th Avenue Baptist Church. They would take me to the Say Berger restaurant, and that was Willie Mays.
Okay.
They would take me to the Birmingham Black Barons Stadium where Willie Mays and others played. They would show me the beauties, if you will, of Birmingham.
When you say they took you to the 16th Street Baptist Church, were they talking to you about the bombing there, or were they
Yes.
taking you to,
Yes, and other civil rights locations.
Do you remember what you thought about that as a young man? You would have been almost the same age as the little girls.
I don't think I understood what was really going on at the time. I knew that there were separate facilities. I knew that I would have to work as hard, if not harder, to share in the beauty and the wealth of the country. I know that I would have to, according to them, to be able to assimilate with attitude and with presentation, because the everyday manners, table manners, greetings, posture, those silent teachings that I may have not fully understood, but was trusting of them enough to accept going to church, going down and asking the church to pray for me because my mother had died, and to give me wisdom and knowledge. Goodness, ask for wisdom and knowledge. That was every day. Ask for wisdom and knowledge, because once you leave us to go back to Hattiesburg, you don't have that. You don't have that. And they were speaking of relatives as such. And they were ethnocentric.
Yeah.
I mean, they wrote the word on that. So, and I'm not so sure that they did not try to take me from my dad.
Yeah.
I think that was never a discussion of my consciousness, but I sensed, by virtue of him always saying to me, never let anybody talk you against me.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure of all of that. As time progressed, I wondered whether he was my real father.
Oh, really?
But I was not able to affirm that. They never told me that. I asked them that.
What made you think he might not be?
I had heard scuttlebutt in the street, but never was able to confirm otherwise. Birth certificates, all of that, I mean, it's solid. But I remember praying that if he'd lived to 100, never let that become an issue in his mind that I had heard that.
Because you certainly didn't have any sense that he didn't treat you like, I mean, he treated you like
He was the
beloved
best
son.
person I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back.
So you talked about your relatives coming and supporting you after your mother passed away. And earlier you talked to me about, the community right around, and that you had a lot of teachers right there who really kind of took you under their wing, I think. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yep. I think those teachers knew that the path to economic, education, and life freedoms all connected to education. And for some odd reason, I believed it. I believed because they told me that, and I believed because my aunt and my cousins told me that. And I believed it because my dad would always say, get your lesson, get your lesson, get your lesson. And additionally, there were what I call porch people. So when I would walk from W.H. Jones, as I walked past all of those houses, the people on the porches would say, you get your lesson today. You're going to be smart. Be smart. So I knew that there was some connection between getting your lesson, earning a living, and having more than it would take just for a meager lifestyle.
So it sounds like you're getting encouraged in that direction everywhere in your life.
Those porch people, I just wrote an article about it.
Yeah.
They were there, and they always asked about school. I don't know why, but I think they knew that the core effort to making life better started with school. And one even said, and I told you I didn't play a lot of ball, didn't go here and there, but I would listen to what those old folk would say. And one told me, son, there's a reason that people are killed when they try to go to get an education. It must be something in education that will set you free. I never knew what that meant. Mm. But when you looked at the integration of school or going to the separate facilities of sort, all those other kinds of things, it really had an education connection.
And so they were really talking directly about this resistance to school desegregation.
I think that's what they were talking about.
Yeah. And if people are that determined to keep you out,
that's right. There was some high value to it.
You mentioned earlier that you heard that when you first went to school, to the new school, you didn't connect it to Brown, you're a young person, but that over time you heard the teachers talking about that. Do you recall what they said?
Oh, and I later affirmed it.
Yeah. Well,
with the University of Southern Mississippi that it was known and strongly forecast that desegregation and integration would be a reality, but that in the state of Mississippi and other likewise states, massive efforts to stave that led to the funding of new schools so that it became a bargaining point, if you will, that would stave it off for years to come. Mm-hmm. So I sensed that by hearing Mr. Berger and all those other people talk about that, and then learn to see that as a truth.
Were they? Do you recall? Were they happy? I mean, I'm sure they were happy to have the new buildings, but did they? I guess how did they feel about the new buildings versus an actual integration of the schools?
I think they were exuberant about the new building because the real stalwarts of education, I don't think pushed integration. I think they thought with equal footing, financing, and resources, Rowan could be as good as Hattiesburg High. So I don't know that from those old warriors that they pushed and promoted desegregation from the perspective of we're happy to be integrated. Did that make sense?
Yes, sir.
I think they wanted the average daily attendance monies to be equal. I think they wanted new books, and as opposed to one microscope in the biology lab to one per kid as in other schools. You know, I remember seeing one new textbook in the month of October or November in 1968. And that was a geometry book.
How did it sneak through?
Well, they didn't have any to send us. We always got our books from one of the other predominantly Caucasian schools. But I'm sure that they didn't have any anywhere because obviously September passed and October too, so we finally got
So you're a
new
couple
books.
months late getting your
Right.
books. You mentioned Mr. Berger. Can you tell us about Mr. Berger?
I think he was a visionary.
What was
Before his time,
What was his role in the community for people who don't know who he is?
he was an educator and principal at Eureka, Royal Street High, and Rowan High. And as I have said, there had to be a connection with him being so intellectual for the reason that he chose Cornell University to do graduate work as opposed to Brown or the University of Missouri or Indiana like many others. The current superintendent of public schools in Hattiesburg had gone to Cornell, and Dr. Berger mastered, if not the classes that Dr. Blair had, and I think demonstrated he was on par, if not above and beyond, his abilities. So I think the freedoms that Mr. Berger were allowed or given or took led him to build a school system in Hattiesburg second to none, though not integrated.
And so you think it was a very deliberate choice on his part to go to the same graduate institution?
I think so.
You mentioned earlier that Hattiesburg was one of the few places in the state in the 40s that had high school, 12th grade for African Americans. What was the impact of being one of the few places that had that?
Well, though I recently had a conversation with Mr. Berger's son and others, there were people coming from a catchment area of around 50 miles to live here if they had a house or a bedroom available so that their kids could achieve a high school diploma. Otherwise, 8th, 9th grade would be the end of it. And Hattiesburg was just a feeder program to Alcorn State University, since the lion's share of our educators were from Alcorn. And I'm sure there were those that wired Mr. Berger to that, and then I'm sure Mr. Berger wired others to that.
You mentioned that your Alabama relatives were very interested in voter registration. Did your father try to register?
My father never voted.
Never?
I never was able to get him to vote.
Did he talk to you about why he didn't want to or wouldn't?
I can't recall comments to that, but I think he valued his relationships with whites of power. I think he didn't want to do anything where he would be seen as different. And he would say things like, "I'm paving a way for you." And that he did. I don't know of anywhere I went downtown as a 16, 17, 18-year-old that some degree of openness didn't come to me as a result of a relationship that he had.
And when you say downtown, that's the white community?
Correct, correct.
And so people there had an idea who you were because of your father,
I think so, to an extent,
to an extent?
yes.
Which makes it a safer place for you.
Correct. I think I still had to earn my way, but I don't think I had to jump the thorned edges that many others. I don't think I would have to go through 3 tiers of screening as to allow me to buy a watch on credit, because Willie Holloway had an account there. Or to the service station, or to the nurse, to the pharmacy, or places of that kind.
Did you go downtown much?
Yes.
So there were things that you could get downtown that you couldn't get on Mobius Street, or?
Oh, I mean, you had accounts at Sears, J.C. Penney's, Bell Whitley. You had accounts, my mother had accounts at various and sundry stores, Ben's tailoring shop, various other places that I would go with him.
So more selection.
Correct.
You mentioned that your mother had the beauty shop. Did you spend much time there when she was still living?
Yes, for the most part, in there when she was dressing hair, as they called it then. Yeah.
Did you listen to the conversations? What was that like as a young person?
Yes. At that time, children were not afforded the rights to linger, but I would pick up on snippets of hot topics.
I talked to Ms. Connor the other day, and she said that, actually I don't think she said it the other day, but I read it in an interview she had done, that some of the civil rights workers were specifically trying to talk to beauticians and midwives and encourage them to join the movement. Do you know if anybody talked to your mother about that?
I don't recall that. Now, Miss Connor lived 3 doors from me.
Okay.
So I was in and out of that house. Matter of fact, I just came from seeing her son in the convalescent home Sunday.
Yeah.
So I came up in that house as well, Denny, Frank, and I.
Yeah, so you were roughly the same age?
Same age.
Same age?
I think 15, 20 days apart.
Wow. So almost like a twin brother.
Correct.
Yeah. Did any of your teachers talk about voting in the regular schools? Or any kind of
Only
movement?
when I got to the 9th or 10th grade. Ms. Berger, Ms. Sandifer, Mr. Berger, Mr. Clarence McGee. Those were topics of voting at that time.
So they would encourage students to register?
Well, we weren't of age.
When you were of age?
Yeah, we weren't of age at that time, but topics of voting were discussed in class.
Do you know if that was part of the the formal curriculum, or is that they're taking liberties to do that?
I would think there would have been more liberties than courses on civics.
Right. I mean, of course, they have that now, but my
Correct.
understanding is that it was a taboo subject,
Correct.
according to the white
Right.
superintendents at the.
Right, and in the book Count Them One by One,
Mm-hmm.
which is an account of the voting rights efforts in Hattiesburg.
By the Justice Department attorney, is he the one? that
Yes,
wrote that
out of
book?
Boston,
Yeah,
yes.
mhm. What were you gonna, I'm sorry, I missed what you were saying about the book.
Yeah, I'm just saying that at that era,
Mhm.
that era in time, there and Lynn was a discussion all over the city of Hattiesburg, people talking from time to time, and it centered on African Americans voting.
So,
But even prior to that, there were a group of 15 or more that attempted to vote.
so
But
you- so you remember those conversations in the community about
Oh,
their
certainly,
land
yes.
and voting?
oh,
and-
certainly, yes.
What did you think about it?
I accepted that black folk couldn't vote. I accepted that there were separate facilities. I didn't accept that that would be permanent, but I accepted that that was the status quo.
Yeah.
I accepted that that would be those that would agree to that, but I knew that that wouldn't be permanent.
Mm.
That in time things would change.
What's your first memory of race? Or of an understanding of sort of the rules that of white supremacy?
I don't know of the first. I remember of a consciousness of being invited to USM to attend a quasi-student council something of students and being the only African American present. Now there has never been an account or a time that I can't recall that I was black or different.
Mm.
I was always, I mean, my folk in Alabama made me aware of that you always remember that. And this is the way you act as a result of that consciousness. But probably sitting in that meeting, I remember it was hot and I had on a wool coat. And that was the only coat I had. And I remember saying one day I go have to wear this wool coat in May.
In Mississippi.
Yeah. But I've always, if there's any gift that I've had, and I say this without ego, I think I've always thought of possibilities.
Mm.
And I've always thought of reframing a situation despite the current circumstances of it, that there's a way out of this. And I remember reading that you're successful if you've got 6 payments of your salaries in a mayonnaise jar in the bank. Got me?
Yeah.
And oh, have I felt so fortunate since I met that.
So, do you have it in the mayonnaise jar?
A little bit.
Keep it handy, right?
Yeah.
What are the first civil rights activities that you remember in Hattiesburg?
The marches and the mass meetings.
Yeah.
They were almost nightly mass meetings from True Light Baptist Church to St. Paul, to Mount Zion Baptist Church, to Palmer's Crossing, and the marches.
Would you attend the meetings?
I attend the meetings.
Participate?
But again, as young,
Mhm.
one of the luxuries, if you will, was after my mom's death, being able to go fairly freely.
Your father didn't have the same sort of.
Well, you were just going to be at home. My mom would go on the back porch around. Gosh, it had to be 5 minutes to 6 or something, but she would whistle, and I mean, you could hear it 2-3 blocks away. That was
Your signal?
let's get home.
Uh-huh.
Or certainly the street light didn't catch you away from the house. She was a strong-willed person. I say today that all the wayward kids needed my mom for about 10 minutes.
That's all it took.
I didn't need a police officer, just my mom. So after she passed, then I was able to go to some of the mass meetings, but not carte blanche. I mean, I had to be back in at 8:30 or 9, or there would be a responsible person of which my dad would let me go with. And one of those summers, relatives came from Muskegon, Michigan, and they were down, and I had probably more leverage, more fun, more freedom than I'd ever had.
Yeah. What were, I'm guessing your dad didn't go to the meetings.
No, my dad didn't go.
What were the meetings like for you as a young person? What was it like to be at the mass meetings?
It would have been the first time I'd been in the integrated meetings with whites. It reflected to me hope and freedom. You know how they say they train elephants, and at babies they put chains around one of their feet, but over time, after they are inculcated into that mindset, that the chain turns into a small string. It's a mindset. Well, just hearing that the Freedom Riders, and just the name, they were Freedom Riders, that they were coming to set us free. But I have to say this. My dad, despite his hesitancy to be involved in what we call the civil rights movement, he never spoke to me in terms of I had limits of achievement. I mean, he never said, I wanted to go to Hattiesburg High School. And Miss Connor's son, Denny, went. The kids, Jeffrey and Tiny, that I lived with after Mom died, went. A lot of them went. I wanted to go. And my dad says, baby, let me ask Miss Edna, she was a white lady, that managed the office at the Fertilizer place. Now, until this day, I don't know whether he lied or not. But I couldn't wait until he got back home. I said, Dad, what did Miss Edna say? She said, things are going well where you are. You need to stay there. I can't discount that. But I know I couldn't have been more happier than being at Rowan High School.
Yeah.
I don't think, because Denny came back, Jeffrey came back, Jesse came back. All those that I know went, came back, and didn't graduate.
They didn't.
Or
Oh, you mean
failed.
From
Yeah,
Hattiesburg?
or faced some kind of challenge.
Were you disappointed when he said that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so when you say now, today, you couldn't have been happier than you were at Rowan, is that in retrospect, or did you have some sense of that even at the time?
I don't think I would have had the pride that Rowan High School was pride. Give a man a fish, he'll eat today. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. That's what those folk would take that stage every day and tell you. He who knows and knows not that he knows not, he needs to be taught. I wouldn't have gotten all of that.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't have gotten, you know, I look at Denny, I look at all those others. I'm not negative to them.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what I needed where I was. So if Miss Edna made that decision, or if my daddy made that decision, that was the right decision for Eddie Holloway.
You said that you mentioned Denny and others who transferred, and this is, I assume, freedom of choice.
Yes.
To the white school, Hattiesburg High.
Yes.
And that they all the ones you know, came back to the black schools.
Well, let me say, not all,
Most.
but a significant number
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason.
Did they talk to you about why they came back?
No. But even today, as we get together, as in reunions,
Mm-hmm.
those that went to Hattiesburg High, for whatever reason, still come to our reunion. Why? I've never been man enough to ask. Why don't you go to your own reunion? I've never been, but there was something. There's something. Does that make sense? We just had a gathering this past summer. All of them came, and I wanted to say, well, you didn't go to school. Oh, well, you didn't graduate with us. You know, but I wouldn't have said that.
The children who transferred over there, do you know what their motive, did they make that decision? Did their parents make that decision?
I think, in part, their parents. I think they thought the grass was greener. The water was colder. And they may have gotten better pedagogy, but not love, understanding, a third eye or a third ear. I can assure you of that.
Yeah. Do you think any of the parents just thought somebody had to do it? Do you think they really thought it was better, or that they?
Oh, I think they thought it was better.
Yeah.
I think by far. I think many parents thought it was better. Because I heard them say.
And is that because the equipment, because it's white? Is it the resources at the schools?
I think all of the above.
Things, yeah. And and I think I asked you this already, but I'll ask it again. Did they talk to you about the kind of harassment that they experienced in those schools?
Yeah, I've heard just a conglomerate of things like that. I have to believe it because they say it. But I've never experienced that in my life. And I was the first student out here as a resident assistant. I was the first student of color as an office assistant. And I don't say this with ego, I was the first to staff Elam Arms Residence Halls, which was an upscale 455 male residence home that was private, swimming pool, turn back service, food catered by Morrison's. I've never experienced any of that.
What year did you come out here?
1968, washing dishes right in that building.
How'd you get that job?
I was standing on the corner and I asked the man, did he know where I could find work? And he called me late on that evening.
You were in high school then?
Yes.
Was this during the school year or a summer job? Or
Summer.
Summer, yeah. What was it like to work over here, working in the kitchen?
I mean, it was washing dishes.
Yeah.
I'd wash dishes at Southern Air Hotel. I'd wash dishes at La Grace Motel.
So you had some
I was
experience
washing
with
dishes.
it. And so I'm assuming all of the workers were African American in the kitchen?
Yes.
Yeah. So were they people you knew, part of the community, or?
Knew me.
Yeah,
I knew.
yeah. You said that you were the first resident assistant. What year did you come out here to school?
1970.
Did it make a difference to you coming here to school that you had actually already worked on campus?
No, actually, Miss Sip and Mr. Berger and all of those that I've referenced, they wanted me to go to Jackson State or Alcorn. My choice to go to USM was because of my father was living, and I needed to be somewhere where I could aid and assist him. And my dad remarried.
How old were you when you remarried?
15.
Okay, we're back.
You enrolled out here at Southern in 1970. That's about 5 years after the first African Americans on campus. Is that right?
Correct.
Is that okay? And I believe you said that you knew both of the young women who were.
They came to my mother's beauty parlor, and their mothers and grandmothers did.
Did you have an opportunity to talk to them about their experiences before you came out here?
We sung in the church choir.
Yeah, yeah. So what did they say about it?
I never had direct conversation with them other than I would say that Elaine Armstrong and I were relatively close.
Mm-hmm.
Miss Branch was an older person, so she was really remote to the fiber of the school. Elaine lived on campus, sung in the choir, traveled with the team, the choir, the Mexico, the whole works. So I don't think I needed an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I was fairly independent
Mm-hmm.
at that time. I remember taking a bus, getting off the bus out here, taking off school that day, letting the counselor know I was going to be out, coming out here applying for school to take the ACT test, and kind of that's the rest of that was history. And I said if I were not admitted, I'd try William Carey or. So I had probably at that time met a couple of people that I worked during the summers on recreational facilities, and they were students of USM. They would have been graduate students, but
Were these white students?
yes,
Yeah. And you had good relationships with them? Yeah.
I cannot sit here and tell you of woes that I've had with white folk. When I applied for the resident assistant's job, they moved me from room 364 Scott Hall to 411. I asked, why were you moving me? And they said, you applied for a resident assistant's job? And I said, yes. They said, we don't have one at this time, but see if you'd like it. Well, I mean, I think I was insightful enough to know that they were putting me on 411 because it was an all-white floor, and to see if I could relate to white kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those guys became my best friends.
Yeah.
Edward Wong and all those guys, and the next year they offered me the head residency for the entire hall.
So were you an RA that year when they moved you?
without pay.
So you did a year of voluntary RA and then became.
Didn't like it that it was volunteer,
Yeah.
but knew that it was a pathway and a stepping stone that my day would come.
So, you lived on campus even though
Scott
you wanted
Hall.
to stay in town to be near your dad?
Yes.
What made you decide to live on campus?
Well, I could get my meals,
Okay,
and I didn't have a car.
so it was a lot easier to
Correct.
stay on campus and, so one of the things we sort of have skipped is, the Freedom Schools. So
Yes.
how did you get involved in the Freedom Schools?
Well, all up and down Mobius Street were freedom libraries around at that time it was called the Black Folks Library. It was really the community center. There were freedom school efforts. And then there were freedom school efforts at the True Light Baptist Church. I would go, but not every day. I'd go and get a book or from the library. I would go to some of the meetings. But those folk in Alabama, they really instilled in me a sense and response mindset. I remember going, and I've never told this, but many of those kids appeared to be just emaciated in poverty. Their appearance, a sense of without, a lack of knowing of where they were, being driven there because they were going to give them some food. And Aunt Punch, Inez, and Lewis had taught me against that. They said, go buy your own bologna. And don't eat any bread unless you touched it only.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't participate like the other students would participate. Many of those that participated, their parents were involved. So I didn't have a parent connection.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew to go get me a couple of books. I knew to read the encyclopedias of different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I marched. When I would sense danger, I would leave. If we were marching one night up town and we get there and I see people that represented the clans with guns, and I knew all the other guys with me only they had Coca-Cola bottles, broken up beer bottles, I'd go home.
So they were going to defend themselves?
Yes. You know, I don't want to say I was an outlier,
Yeah.
but as long as I can remember, I've been an independent thinker.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's best to describe it that way.
Sounds like it.
Okay.
Did you ever sit in the classes? Did you ever participate in not just the library and borrowing the books, but the Freedom School classes?
Yeah, I would go when they would talk about civility, civics.
Mm.
I would go sometimes when those people they would bring in guitarists and they'd play and
Yeah.
and all. But I didn't go. I think I got the essence. I would go around with some of the people knocking on doors and asking them would they register to vote. I would like to say that my involvement was kind of structured, if you will. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you remember how people would respond or how you felt when you were doing the canvassing on voting?
A preparation for that was how my dad saw it.
So
He
you
didn't-
worked on your dad first.
He didn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
Though he was not oblivious to the issues of race, you know, he may have seen himself beyond that. I don't know. He never discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always said it, what's the benefit of this? What's the benefit of that? How might it impact the masses?
Mm-hmm.
So I would be prone to, if I'd go to the doctor, Dr. A.T. Tatum's office, and they in turn say you have to go to the back door, and I would say, no, sir, I'd like to go to the front door.
What kind of response would you get?
Well, they asked me out,
Yeah.
you know, so I'd call the Office of Civil Rights in D.C., and Dr. Tatum called me and said, son, I held your grandmother in my arms at the time of her death, and I've known your daddy, best man I know, but you can't come back to my office. And then from that point on, I don't know whether I was a snitch for the government, probably never told this either, but I received calls from the Office of Civil Rights for 25 years on voting, location changes, on my opinions on anything changing the boundaries from schools and things of that kind. So quietly I filed objections to separate medical facilities over around the old Methodist Hospital and Petal, Mississippi.
I know that, one of the things, the Civil Rights Act, and then I can't remember what the name of the legislation was that provided more federal funding for medical facilities, but that part of what both of those did was provide this kind of recourse, right, where there's federal oversight.
Right.
And when you had that encounter with the doctor, is that like the late 70s? Late 60s, early 70s?
Early 70s.
Early 70s.
Now what they did was they locked the door from entrance, but you would have to go through the front and go back to the to the same room. And I remember really being bothered by my dad still went to him. Mm-hmm. His sister still went to him. And all of those teachers that lived across the street that I taught still went to him. And I remember that as almost overwhelming.
So they would go to the white doctor instead of Dr. Smith?
Yes. They would go to Dr. Tatum, A.T. Tatum.
Yeah.
And they would go in that front door and go back to that back.
Do you know why they would see him?
I'm sure family lineage.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been also he allowed pay if they didn't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I really think he was a quality physician.
Mm-hmm.
Good, strong track record. Probably had more African American clients than otherwise. I never saw anything ill about his services.
Do you have any idea how he would answer? I'm asking you how he would answer, but he's saying to you, I held your grandmother when she was dying. There's so much intimacy in that. That's a very intimate thing, and yet you can't walk in the front door.
Well, my conversation with him is that, I remember like it was yesterday. I said, Dr. Tatum, I share seats with your daughter, and we today are in a political science class, and we enter the same door. Her name is Nancy, and my name is Eddie. And she's such a nice person. So we bid it goodbyes. Now, I didn't do that without fret or fear. At that time, I managed the front desk of Scott Hall, and I had access to master keys for all of the rooms in all of the halls. So I would stay in various and sundry rooms at night in fear,
Yeah.
and it may have been a false fear.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That's a lot of access for you to have had a key to get into all the rooms. Sort of a,
that was not public.
yeah.
I mean, it was only because I worked in the front desk.
That you had that. Do you remember other incidents like that where you're sort of challenging those boundaries?
I've always challenged boundaries. I've always applied.
Yeah.
I've always asked for what reason. I've always thought that if I could equate the other applicants, that at some point in time, I'm sure to some extent I would rationalize it as providential. If I didn't get it, the next man will.
Mm-hmm.
At least I opened the door. I applied for a scholarship, if you will, for a specialized service training of your choice to help your impoverished condition. I can't recall the name of that scholarship. But anyway, I made it to the third round of that and had to go to the Sheridan Hotel in Jackson. And it was new for an African American back then. But I always wanted to be. And my dad would always say, now you can't be juked up around white folk all the time, you know. But I didn't desire to be juked up under whites. I just desired access to. But during that interview, the guy said, Mr. Holloway, how are you? See, you're from Mississippi. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of this? Do you know James Earl Easterlin? James O. Easterlin. I said, yes, he's a senator. He says, what do you think about his service? I said, well, he's one of two senators, state of Mississippi, Mr. Stennis and Mr. Easterlin. Well, how do you think of his service? And I said, I think he's an able service provider.
You're doing your best, right?
I'm doing my best and whatever. And he said, well, I don't think much of it. And I said, okay. He says, he authored the Farm Subsidies Act, whereby farmers are paid not to grow crops. And he had, I said, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I said, he had enough land he had amassed to make 10 farms, and he was able to develop wealth from that and on and on and on. He said, do you know something else? I said, yes. He said, sir, you're not going to be awarded this scholarship because you sat there knowing what you just told me and you accommodated me. Leaders walk a weary limb outward.
What did you make of that?
That there are places where you got to take risk and tell the truth.
So did you apply that lesson?
Ever since then,
Yeah.
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 I've learned to frame and reframe
Right.
and do it in a way that it's accommodating and not so abrupt
Right.
that it'll take me out of the formula.
Sort of walk that line of
Yes.
how to say your piece, but do it in a way that somebody might be able to hear.
True.
Yeah, when Paul,
You talked to me earlier about, you thought that Mr. Berger was really a visionary. Can you talk about, I can't remember, I think we mostly talked about that outside, not on the interview. Can you talk about his role in the community? I mean, I guess we did talk on the tape about his going to Cornell.
I think Mr. Berger was in a difficult walk. It was required that he remain on the inside, but he was conscious of those things that were paramount to the outside. A great debate that's under the surface now is his role or his inactivity, or whether he had a role in Clyde Kennard's effort to come here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I've asked Dr. Lucas, I've asked Vernon's son, Damer's son, I've asked as many of the elderly as possible. I've heard that since the opposition was so strong for Clyde Kennard to come here, that a group of people said, we'll work to keep Clyde out if you'll finance a junior college and let it be on the financial doles of the state. That's a lofty. That's in perpetuity. You're creating a college.
You're gonna pay that debt for a while.
Right. That seems like the creation of a Berger, because it would have been Prentice Institute, the junior college that's now defunct.
Yeah.
That's where he came from.
He had been at Prentice?
He lived, that's where he's from.
Oh, I see.
And the hallmark of African American education was in that Prentice, Port Gibson area. Mr. Berger was always in a negotiating posture. He was always leading in chaos. So the end product of his work was a stellar, separate, but almost equal educational system where the average daily attendance and cost per kid was significantly less than any other. So I hold him in high regards, just knowing the little that I know.
What he was able to accomplish in
Yes.
this context of this system.
Right.
You mentioned Mr. Lucas and asking Mr. Lucas. Now, is it Aubrey?
Yes.
And he was the registrar at the time?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Has he talked about what happened when Mr. Kennard tried to come out here?
He told me that Eddie, at the time, Mr. Berger, spoke with legislators and the wealthy, that he was a direct individual, and that he had limited discussion with him on the involvement of Kennard in the process. Don't know whether that's totally accurate or not. He also said that Dr. McCain told him that the state of Mississippi higher education should be fully desegregated or integrated, but the place that it should start should be the University of Mississippi, in that we are one vote away from the closing of this school. So the delicacy of our standing with the stakeholders is such that it ought not start here, that we could be closed overnight. Now, that's what Lucas told me.
Why would Southern have been at risk of being closed then?
He explained that our status with the state board was of that nature.
Huh.
I don't think, and I'm led to believe, if he's correct, there was more than just whether Clackanar came here. But if any disturbance here,
That would be the last,
yes,
that would be the excuse.
right.
Huh.
That's what he's constantly told me over the past 30 years. That McCain did say, he said McCain said that Ole Miss should be integrated and lead the way, and it would be perfect if Ole Miss would be winning the SEC that year.
So successful school, quote, desegregation in Mississippi
You know,
relies
whether-
on a good football team.
Whether all of that's correct, I don't know, but that's what, in very serious conversations, he's told me.
Does he raise that, or you raise it, or, I mean?
I've called him and asked him.
Yeah,
We've met.
Yeah. Because of course, he's one of the people that's still living who was actually present for some of that.
Right.
Growing up, were you aware of his case?
Not, oh yes, they
Yeah.
talked about it in the beauty parlor.
Yeah.
But again, keep in mind, through mind's eye, he was a man gonna go to Southern. And at that time, I only knew of one black that was at Southern. His name was Mr. Pally, and he sold peanuts.
Yeah,
So he would come out here and stand and sell peanuts.
big difference.
Yeah.
Did your parents talk about it at all?
No, not in my presence,
Yeah.
but the ladies would in the beauty parlor.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, Miss Jean was instrumental always in the NAACP. So you always had that from Miss Jean, and she was a beautician also. Up on Mobius Street, in the 500, 600 block of Mobius Street, and they had a shoe shine parlor. And her church, which AME, African Methodist Episcopal, has always had a lead in the civil rights.
I'm glad you brought her up again. We've interviewed both Ms. Jean Connor and Mr. Clarence McGee, who I think you also mentioned
Right.
as a teacher. Can you, it would be great if you could describe them so that we could sort of have this crossover with the interviews.
I think Miss Connor was a willing worker. She was hands and feet to the movement by way of records, by way of history and involvement. Gosh, she was kind of a Miss Bethune.
Mm.
I remember Mr. McGee, he was my 10th grade science teacher. I never was privileged to conversation with him until 15, 20 years ago with his NAACP involvement. I think his intentions are honorable, somewhat dated. And what I mean by that is, there are some people that would think that the only place you can get a quality education would be Alcorn. And their love and insight for Alcorn supersedes the highest order that Harvard University would offer.
Alcornites are fierce.
Yes. So I think his limits would prevent insight growths.
So this is a good moment, I think, to talk about Southern and how much it's changed in the last 50 years. When I was growing up in Mississippi, there was still in the 70s and early 80s, my impression was that there was still a pretty stark divide between the three major white universities and the HBCUs. And though even at that point, I think where we went to school, there was the impression that Southern was the most welcoming of the three white institutions for African American students. Can you describe sort of Southern today and how it fits in this, or how it's changed?
Well, an inside joke is that USM is Mississippi's fourth HBCU. I don't know whether that's kind or not to say. I think it's positive from the perspective that we do a tremendous job to assure access. And we do a tremendous job to provide services to students where they are.
Is it an open access school?
In terms of entrance, ACT and all? No. It has the same entrance requirements as Ole Miss and State and Alcorn Valley.
So all the schools have the same?
All 8 have the same. The difference might be that one institution might commit that we're going to recruit 60% from out of state.
Mm-hmm.
And their financial strength allows for that to occur.
Yeah.
So they might have 60% of their incoming students from the state of Texas, and those may have not been admitted to the University of Texas at Austin, Texas Christian, Southern Methodist, or Rice, but they may bring 28 ACTs. USM's catchment area is roughly 125 miles, primarily first generational. I hope this does not sound egotistical, but I know what I needed when I got here in 1970. And since my arrival, I've tried to broaden that across the full breadth of this institution. From going to Dr. Lucas day one saying that we need an office of inclusion, to talking to athletics about in-service training for guys that work with students at risk, from constantly talking about the need for campus-wide services and civility training, because many of the students that will come will be rough on the edge and they'll do things that will jeopardize their educational setting, to creating an office of a student's ombudsman services to deal with those idiosyncrasies that kids come to school with that average faculty knows nothing about, to be on a 24-hour call to manage the almost all foreseeable and all predictable. And I think as a result of that, over time through, be it efficiency or the combination of all, the word has gotten out that you can get from here to there by going to USM, if that makes sense.
I didn't ask you what you did when you graduated. Have you worked at USM most of your career?
No, I left USM and went to William Carey University and ran a program called Students Services. It was for the academically high risk that had deficits in 3 cores: academic, social, and financial. And we tried to make sure that financially their needs were met, that there was tutoring to help with their deficits, and there was counseling to help with their social efforts. Ran that program for 3 years, and we went into a catchment area of 30 miles to bring in 100 kids that were 11th or 12th graders to William Carey. Plus, we worked with them when they were there. Then I left, never wanted education again, and went into alcohol and drug treatment. Ran 4 clinics: New Augusta, Columbia, Purvis, and here at night. And actually came here in 1979 to work until a friend completed his doctorate in 2 years at the University of Texas at Denton. So.
And that was how many years ago?
About 37.
But who's counting?
Yeah.
When you were talking about Southern and access, and you can get a good education, you can get where you. What's the percentage of African American students on campus?
Closing around 40%.
40%. And am I right that there are more African American students at Southern than any other school in the state?
Correct.
Is that right? So that's got to be a tremendous shift from 50 years ago.
Certainly. But I think we've been accommodating. I think, I really think on that student affairs side, Dr. Paul would have been here, the scope of time. I would have been here, and Dr. Lucas. It's been a goal and aim to afford kids access to.
Yeah. So do you think, my sense is, and it's somewhat superficial, but that, even after James Meredith went to Ole Miss, that the people that followed him continued to really struggle, that it was not that it remained a hostile space. But it sounds like you came to Southern 5 years after the first 2 students to desegregate it and didn't find that kind of a hostile. Do you think that Southern made a different commitment?
If you look at the struggles across the country, be it with housing, affordability, be it with somebody here in this town, or some bodies, despite our challenges, cut those sharp edges off. I think Mr. Berger was a part of that formula. I think Dr. Nooncaster, William Carey, I think they collaborated to integrate William Carey to be the first private college in the state to do so. Mr. Berger selected those students from Rowan High.
What year was that?
1965.
1965.
I think that had been a discussion beforehand with Dr. Berger, Dr. Nooncaster. I think Dr. Berger Mr. Berger and Dr. Lucas and the powers that be. I think it got crosshaired with a lot of people looking at Mr. Berger moving here and there. That's why I said his walk, I think, was so delicate.
Mm-hmm. Trying to push here and sort of manage here.
Right. I think another person involved in that, though a lot of people spoke ill, Mayor Chain, and others.
Mm-hmm.
Moran Pope, a former mayor here, leading proponent of USM. I think there were enough people that kept talking.
Do you think the firebombing of the Damer home and the murder of Mr. Damer, did that serve as a wake-up call for people? You know, that they, I mean, I've heard that at least, you mentioned the president, William Carey, that Ms. Damer said that he helped try to raise a little bit of money to rebuild the house. Did the white community react to that? Was sort of like, okay, this really is too far? And is I guess the impression I got, and does that then create more space for the people who want to do something?
I think there's been more willingness to work together than not. I think in the midst of fray and controversy, over time that I'm aware, there have been the currents of conversations with folk talking that has worked to us not becoming as some other cities have.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned when we were talking earlier that you're on the, is it the Civil Rights Museum Commission? What's the title of
the Mississippi Civil Rights Commission.
Commission. Can you talk about the commission and
Yeah,
its work?
It's a Mississippi legislative act that, one, called for the creation of a civil rights component into the curriculum of the public schools. We work from the Mississippi Center of Reconciliation
William
with
Renner over at Ole Miss.
with William Renner, Miss Glisium.
Mm-hmm. The Macomb schools have done a lot with that, haven't
The
they?
Macomb schools have done a lot, yes. So we meet monthly, sometimes quarterly, looking at ways and means to best do that. And I also sit on the Mississippi Coalition Against Sexual Assault, whereby we look at employing tactic skills and programming that prevents stalking and violence against women.
Is that a new commission, or is
No,
it
it's
been
about
around for a while?
6 to 8 years.
Okay.
So we've pulled together all campuses in the state to be an arm to minimize ill acts of women, female as well as others,
Mm-hmm.
and respect for humanity. And so all of those things I think have led to and all of my fortunes, I've tried to bring them locally. A guy that I met in 1970, white guy, that said, Eddie, I've paid for you to be a member of and you've been accepted to Leadership Mississippi. Never heard it in my life. So I went. It's a 6-month program on developing leadership and making Mississippi better. And you look at some aspects of the state, its status, where you would think it could get better, and you map and design ways from those study committees that you could make that happen. Well, once I completed that, came and organized and formed Leadership Hattiesburg, a wholesale integrated body of young professionals. We're in our 25th year of staffing 20 people, up and coming, to make Hattiesburg better. And as I say before, I'm not saying that there are no ills, that there are no situations or impropriety or inequities. And maybe I'm blind to some. But I believe that attitude, understanding, hard work, not knowing every time that you will get what you want, that you could impact humanity by way of race. I'm not saying everywhere I've gone that I've felt welcome, that there's been an ingratiation that Eddie's here. But if I sense that, there'll be another time when I'll have an opportunity to say hello and to build a bridge. Now, sometimes that's misunderstood. That's seen as kissing, hugging inappropriately. But I say you build a bridge. And it may not be strong enough for me to go across it, but maybe tomorrow someone else can.
Is the Civil Rights Commission involved with the Civil Rights Museum?
Yes, there are two separate boards.
Okay.
We met with them 4 or 5 months ago to see the elements of their preparation for the Mississippi History Museum and the Civil Rights Museum. So Ms. Glissum is connected to all.
She's one of the connectors.
Right.
Of both pieces.
And many members and former members of both, they're all
Yeah, interconnected.
interconnected, yes.
Can you, I don't know what the latest is, but can you just tell us a little bit about the plans for the museum?
I'm not familiar with
I didn't know.
all of the plans other than what I was privileged when I went to their, they had hired the architect for rendering, they had hired the programming group to make sure that Mississippi's story was inculcated into the fiber. But for me, the challenge would be that you must exit with a dream as opposed to exit with an agony. You know,
How do you tell the story?
right? So that was my challenge. That people, when they exit, they should not be so marred with the negatives that they don't have a dream for the future.
Well, certainly a lot of the movement activism in Mississippi is inspiring, even if the results aren't always what people hoped.
True.
I want to quick look. So what, I mean, you spoke to that, I think, a little bit with your comment just now, but what do you want people to know about the civil rights movement?
I think the civil rights movement was a breathtaking, eye-opening opportunity to see tomorrow from where we stood and to take advantage of those resources that those brought from a yonder here to aid and assist us. I think the ingenuity and or the strength was with those that were still here. But because they were so linked and wired to their oppressor or the oppressor's strengths, that it would have taken longer had there not been a voice of freedom coming from a wealth of places that could speak to that for us. So it gave us a greater opportunity to see life from a distance and to see new possibilities and new beginnings. And I think those that were wholesale against it could no longer just see it as those people that were basically here that we are taking care of, and how are they disrespecting our efforts. But that it allowed Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia to see that we are behind in the wholesale efforts of equality and services to the least of us. And that unless there are some economic gains and heaping doses of educational advancement, we will not have a society of people that are able to pursue dreams that will allow them to reap the freedoms of what this great land affords.
That would be a great stopping place, but I did think of another question I wanted to ask you about the movement era, and I don't know if you would know about, did you know about the Spirit?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about them?
Well, coming up, I never knew who the Spirit was.
Right.
You know, I did know that during the times when schools were, or places where businesses were boycotted, that if you break those lines, that the Spirit will visit you during the night and things of that kind.
So what did that, for people who don't know what the Spirit is, what would it mean to be visited in the night?
Oh goodness, I mean, you never knew who the Spirit was. It may be your next door neighbor, it may be a person across the street. I remember the Spirit by virtue of me wanting to start cutting hair at 11 years of age. And I couldn't go to a store and buy hair clippers. So I ordered them at age 11 from National Bellas Hess. I don't know if either of us are old enough to know. It was a mail order business. It was a precursor maybe to Best Buy and others. But you could buy hair clippers and pans and luggage and other things. And it came to the store on Front Street.
It couldn't come to your house.
But I couldn't go down there and get them. So I remember calling, and they mailed me my Walls clippers to the house. So it was a source of economic steering where it called to the attention of those movers and shakers in our community that people have galvanized, they understand economics to an extent, and that if you don't afford them access or at least representation in your stores, that their dollars will not be good enough for you. And unfortunately, in this country, wealth is a motivator. Herzberg says that money is not a motivator, but it can be a demotivator. That in times if it demotivates, people will act to that. You know, I was against the effort of the kids there at the University of Missouri. I always had a favorable opinion of the University of Missouri. Dr. Orville Strickland, profound.
He's from Hattiesburg.
From Hattiesburg, wrote the school song of Euro and Eureka, was just premier there. Maybe half dozen of our faculty members had gone to journalism there. But I don't think any of that would have galvanized until the football team said no. And that wasn't $1 million. That was probably $50 million that weekend had they not played. So the dollar.
That was going to be a big cost.
Right.
And so what What would the Spirit do if somebody from the black community would go into one of the stores that was being boycotted?
From what I remember, they may break your windows at your house or your car, or might publicize something ill of you.
In Hattiesburg, was the Spirit also involved in self-defense? Did they do protection as well? Or
Well,
was that separate groups?
Well, I don't know whether that was the defense. They used to call that the deacons of defense
Yeah.
or whatever. And whenever there would be dignitaries come, like Dr. King or Dr. Vivian or Shuttlesworth or some of the other people come into the area, they would provide security that would double dose that of their own security as well as what your local authorities would give.
Yeah. Are there other things you can think of that I haven't asked about that are important?
Well, I would think if it were reflect of me in terms of my thoughts relative to leadership and relative to civil rights, that I think we, in my mind, people that were on the inside of the civil rights movement maybe were less heralded, but were able to negotiate and accomplish far more than maybe many that had great posture and absorbed the television screens. Somebody had to do the work. And I've always thought it best for me to work from the inside and to work from the strengths that we have, build bridges, have open lines of communication, and from that will come great outcomes. I would hope that the University of Southern Mississippi as it looks today is in part because we did it right. Is in part because I've not been a silent observer. I've gone to Dr. Lucas, I've gone to Dr. Timms, I've gone to all of the presidents of things that I see that will benefit this institution, and in particular, African American students that will come with a wealth of needs. Still, most of our communities are separate when it comes to residential or of our religious faith. Still, many students bring to the platform deficits, and in particular African American students. And we must be purveyors of good teaching, insightful teachings, and to know that if it's preventable, if it's foreseeable, you can prevent it. If it's predictable, you can better manage it. So if you're going to have students coming with lower ACT scores, transferring from junior colleges with great needs, that you should have a service of kind to aid and assist them, that their failures are in part on them and their families, but another part of that is on you because you got them here and you didn't do what it took to salvage them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope in some way my comments have made sense.
Absolutely. I very much appreciate your interview and your time with us. So thanks.
Yeah.
You just mentioned knowing the Ladner sisters from Hattiesburg, or Palmers, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about them?
Well, let's see. I shared dinner with them several months ago. We went to the unveiling of the photo of Clyde Kennard in D.C. Coming up, they were just household stories of their works at Jackson State and Tougaloo, and that Palmer's Crossing was a stronghold for civil rights efforts. Kelly Settlement, Palmer's Crossing, a lot of people saw those communities as communities of need, but the strengths were that those people owned their property, and they found, I guess, they answered the question that God was making people, but he wasn't making more land. So they got them a piece of land, you know, and the connection of Brown University with Tougaloo. I met Miss Holohan, Caucasian lady, the first Delta in the country, graduate of Tougaloo.
All right.
So I've just always
Is
been a
that,
student.
Is that Joan Trumpauer? I don't know what her last name is
I
now.
think it's
I think she still goes by Trump Hall.
Well, she's got another form.
there's a Holohan, Holland,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, Mulholland.
Mulholland. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
right.
I know who you're talking about.
yeah,
now.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because she was out there at Tougaloo with them.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But they still have relatives in Hattiesburg. So just from reading of them, that's one thing that I failed to tell you. And I'm sure they missed this at Hattiesburg High and other schools. Those instructors would link you to the precursors. And if there was a person living in Detroit doing well from Hattiesburg or Pennsylvania or New York or California or they will give you that connection. And for me, I would always say, gosh, they got to that location from right here.
You know, it's interesting because I think both of them, but I know Dory's been very explicit with me, you know, that she found it so upsetting that with 2 colleges here in the community, she had to leave for her education. So it's interesting. So from your perspective, coming behind, you see where they go.
Yeah,
And from their perspective, they wish they had the opportunity to stay like you did.
yeah. Well, and again, for me, I never focused on color. I was sensitive of color and race, but I never focused on it. I never became a slave to, oh, let me tell you, I bet you they're not gonna like me, to have that mindset, or I've got to do this and I've got to do that because, or you know how it is, or when I walked on and I saw that all my instructors were Caucasian, I knew they would feel this. I mean, I've never had that. I've been conscious that I'm African American,
Right.
but I didn't see that as a minus. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
I saw that there may be things that they don't know that I need to share with them, or there may be experiences of which they've not been afforded, and I may need to share that with them. It's kind of like, in closing, I was in a setting and a psychologist came out laughing. I said, "What's going on?" She's not going to believe it. I said, "What?" She says, "I was doing a psychological assessment on this little girl, and I just had to come out. I didn't want to laugh in her face." I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "I asked her to name 3 animals, and she said Milton the Monster, Godzilla, and the Booger Man." And she says, "That's pathetic." And I say, "No. I always had to go to bed at night in a dark room, or the Booger Man was going to get me." Godzilla was the only movie we had at Star Theater.
Yeah.
It stayed there 10 years. So in that kid's mindset,
Right? That's what they
those were 3 animals. Did that make sense? So that kid was okay.
Yeah.
I was
The
telling about
student,
the student
Yeah, yeah.
who was in trouble and had been exited from a process and actually was probably skilled enough to play on Sunday, if you know what I mean.
I hear you.
But because of his attitude and what he had said, led to him being exited the process. So I think my style has always been to share information and for insight purposes. So if this guy had an opportunity to play, for USC or for University of Texas or Oklahoma, but his grandmother said, no, go to USM, that's closer to me. And he made that commitment. And here she comes up and is diagnosed with a possible terminal illness. He didn't go to class because he called her and she said she was feeling real bad. But he called the instructor and asked what will be covered. But on the report that he didn't go to class, he was aggressively, properly though, disciplined. But to the point of his pain, he made some very awkward, inappropriate statements to the power that be. I never thought that I was going to change that power opinion, but for future references, he needed to understand that this was a grandmother in the absence of a mother and a father who said she was sick, who said, come to Southern Miss, instead of those other lofty programs.
Mm-hmm.
Had the power person asked the right questions, it wouldn't have gone to the extent that it did.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've attempted throughout my walk is to help those have the necessary insights to ask the right questions so that they can gain from their view of where the people or the person is, be it fighting, be it aggression, be it any of the deficits that our kids bring with them.
Mm-hmm.
They are not excuses for which they should lie on,
Mm-hmm.
but they are reasons by which conversation hopefully will make them benefit. Did that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So I would hope as a result of those experiences with our students, we have developed a reputation that students will come from extreme circumstances, knowing that although this is a historically white institution, they will have access to the best and brightest, and that the doors will open both ways, and they will find accommodations.
And that seems like one of the successes of the civil rights movement.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us today. Really
Thank you so much to each of you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.